Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
If I were to ask you or any other dentist on planet Earth, would you like to get more new patients? I'm sure you would say yes. I mean, there might be some outliers, but for the most part, I would say 99.99% of dentists are going to say yes. And it doesn't take a lot of brain power to figure out why. We know that new patients drive growth. They expand the practice. They keep your practice relevant and they keep it alive. So the problem is over the last 15 years, the amount of options you have to get new patients, marketing ideas, specifically with the advent of internet marketing, social media, things of this nature, implant funnels and so on, it makes it difficult to decide, which path do I choose? Where do I go? And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode, because no matter what you're doing, no matter whether you're using an outside company or you're doing some of this stuff yourself, there are 6 specific things that every doctor owner has to know about their new patient marketing and be on top of to make sure that it's successful. My name is Jeff Bloomberg and I'm your host. And I want to start off with the mindset that you might have, or the way that you're approaching your marketing. And I find this mindset to be very prevalent in the industry. In a lot of cases, what happens is you go, okay, I need more new patients. What kind of marketing is out there? You might look for it online or you might talk to a friend or whatever. And then you find a company and they're going to send out, postcards or they're going to do your pay-per-click or whatever. They're going to give you a funnel or whatever. And you go, okay, good. They say that this product can do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to pay them X amount of dollars. And, at that point, I'm hands off. Everything, they're going to take care of everything. In other words, you've hired somebody to do it. You've outsourced it, which is fine. I'm not recommending that you do your own PPC, pay-per-click, or that you start putting stamps on postcards in your practice. That's not what I'm recommending. But the mentality that occurs in a lot of these cases is I want someone to do it for me, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. In other words, I have no responsibility for the outcome. Like the only responsibility you have is to pay. There's a problem with that. Because if you take a look in your practice, you have 3 basic jobs, or responsibilities. If we boil it down to the basic here, you have 3 basic responsibilities. You have the responsibility as the doctor, where you're the doctor, and you have the responsibility of being the salesperson. You diagnose and you sell treatment. And you also have the responsibility or job of owner/executive. By default, that makes you an executive. These are your 3 areas or zones of operation: doctor, sales, executive. Okay. So obviously each of these areas have a specific outcome associated with them so that you know what the outcome is or the expectations are of the doctor. You're supposed to successfully perform clinical procedures and help restore patients' health function and aesthetic. Well, what's the expected outcome of a salesperson? And I want you to think with this for a second. If you were to hire somebody, I'm not saying you're going to do this, but you hire somebody to do sales for you, what would you expect that person to do? You would expect that person to close people for things, things that they need. You're in a healthcare environment, so we're not selling things people don't need. But if, a patient needs XYZ treatment, you would expect the salesperson to close them for that, which means to wrap it up and get them to pay and get them to arrive to start the service, right? Okay, so if you're being the salesperson and you're not doing that well enough, well, then there's a problem, right? Which is a whole other podcast. But then let's talk about this executive or owner job here for a second. What would you expect of an executive? You would expect an executive to have a growing, profitable organization. All right, well, if you had a person in charge of a company, let's say you had let's take something outside of dentistry. Let's say you had a furniture company and you hire me as the general manager of your furniture company. I'm responsible for running your furniture company. Okay, so if I'm running the whole company, I'm responsible for everything that's going on with that company. The staff, maybe I have other people who do some of these jobs, but ultimately the buck stops with me, right? I'm the one who's ultimately responsible. So maybe I have somebody who handles HR, and I have someone who handles sales, and I have someone who handles marketing and accounting and deliveries and ordering or whatever. Maybe we make our own furniture. But ultimately, if something goes wrong, I'm going to be the final person responsible. So let's say we're not getting any new customers, right? And you go, Jeff, why are we not getting any new customers? It's starting to affect our sales and our overall revenues. And I go, well, I don't know. I paid this marketing company to handle it, and they're not getting us any new customers, so I don't know. I want you to really play that out in your mind for a second. What would you think of that? You would probably not think very highly of the way I was doing my job. Hopefully you wouldn't, because ultimately I'm responsible for whether we're getting new customers or not. The fact that I went out and got somebody to do it still does not absolve me of that responsibility. And that is really the basic problem. That's why when I talk about the 6 things that you have to know, these are things that no matter whether you've hired a company to do your pay-per-click or send out postcards for you or newsletters or billboards, it does not matter what. These are things that you have to know and stay on top of, and there really is no way around this. I mean, I wish I could tell you there is. It's sort of like if somebody wants to get in great shape, but I want to get in great shape and I don't want to eat well and I don't want to exercise. Okay, that just doesn't exist. If you really want to control these areas, the clients that I see that do best are the ones who at least understand these things about their marketing so that they can stay on top of it and always have a consistent flow of, new patients. And, if you don't have the ability to handle this area, this is where all these unusual, weird solutions develop. If you, let's say you want to get more new patients, but you can't. So what do? You go join some PPOs. Right? Because, there's this mentality or frame of mind you can get into that if you've tried something a couple times and it hasn't worked out, then obviously it's impossible. Maybe you've tried hiring a hygienist and you just can't find one. Well, it just must be impossible. Well, I guarantee you there are people in your city who have a hygienist. So it is possible. So that I guess is the thing I would tell you. It is possible. And there are, no matter what you do, no matter what you outsource, you still have to maintain ultimate responsibility. And these things I'm going to go over with you allow you to do that. They help to do that and help you maintain control of this area. So let's take a look at these 6 things. So let's look at number 1. Number 1 is no matter what kind of marketing you're doing, whether you're outsourcing, whatever it is, right? You have to understand what it is you're doing, how it's going to work, and what the expectations are. I would want that really spelled out. So I've hired a company to mail postcards for me, let's say. Well, number 1, I'm going to want to know, who are we mailing to, right? Like what is the criteria by which we're selecting who we're mailing to? What does the postcard look like? And, how is it going to go? How is it going to mail out? What schedule is it going to mail out on? And what are the expectations of this? Because this is another area where I see people get in trouble. If I were to ask you, and I want you to think this answer out before I give you the actual answer. If I were to ask you, let's say it's mail marketing you're doing, postcard marketing. If I were to ask you, what is the expected percentage of response from postcards? What would you think that is? In other words, if you send out 100 postcards, how many people will call your practice? What do you think that number would be? So think about it for a second. Okay, you got it? Most people say between 1 and 4%. So if I send out 100 postcards, I'm going to get 1 to 4 phone calls. That is incorrect. The expected level of response for new patient marketing, I'm not talking about marketing to your patients of record, but if you are mailing to just your broad general area, is 0.25%. I'm not saying that's great. That's the average. So if I mail out 100 postcards, you can't have 0.25% response. I can't have 0.25% call the practice, right? I'd have to send out 400 postcards to guarantee myself 1 phone call is what that means. That's the expected result. Now, if you do the math and things are handled in the practice properly, that can work and you can have a good ROI, but that's the expectation. So if I don't know the expectations ahead of time, I'm going to be immediately upset when we've sent out 10,000 postcards, right? And I only have 25 phone calls. And I'm wondering, what's going on? What happened here? Well, that was the expected, result. That was what we were thinking was going to happen. Because that's the average. So you want to know what the expectations are. Want to know what services these people are going to provide if they're going to be providing a service for you. And you're going to want to know exactly what it is that they're doing. And, one thing I've done, and I'm not saying you have to do this, but I tend to be very hands-on with these things. If I have somebody doing, snail mail marketing where we're mailing things out from the post office, I check that it actually got mailed. I want to see proof. There's a little form they get from the U.S. Post Office when they drop it off. I want to see that it was actually mailed because sometimes, people forget things, things are, left in the warehouse. People forgot to send them. But this way I'm taking some degree of responsibility. So that's sort of rule or guideline number 1. All right. Let's look at number 2. You have to have a budget. You have to have a budget, and that budget has to be set realistically. All right. So if you're planning on doing some marketing, obviously you shouldn't be planning on doing marketing for just 1 month. You're at least planning a quarter ahead at a time, right? So you want to set an amount that you're willing to spend every month. All right. And it needs to be realistic to accomplish the goals that you're wanting to accomplish. So if I know what I can expect from a certain avenue of marketing. I need to get at least, and I know what I need to get. Let's say I'm looking to get 20 new patients a month. And I talk to the folks that are doing my marketing, and they say, for me to get 20 new patients a month, I'm going to need to spend X amount. I'm comfortable spending that amount. Well, then that's what I'm going to allocate. All right. I have to have a set amount that I'm spending, and it has to match what I'm actually looking to get. If I'm going to spend $1,000 a month, I'm not going to get 40 new patients off of that. Do you see? So, but I have to have that budget, because if I don't, a couple things can happen. If I don't have a set amount, whatever I'm doing, especially let's say I've contracted a company to do pay-per-click for me. Well, if I don't set an amount that I'm going to spend for their services as well as for the actual marketing expense, in other words, what they're paying Google, then that can spiral out of control very quickly. So I have to have a ceiling. This is my budget, and this is how much I'm spending. You can set that budget monthly. I would say quarterly is a better move, and you can divide it by month so that you can stay in control. All right? What's our next point? You have to track response. I can't stress this one enough, and this is probably one of the weak areas in dentistry. So let's have a look at something for a minute. If I do a pay-per-click campaign, or I do postcards, or I do newsletters, or I do billboards, or whatever it is I'm doing, what is that going to get me? How do I know if it's working? Now, half the people listening are going to say, well, you're getting new patients. That's half the answer. That's not the full answer. Because if I send out a postcard or if I have a Google ad, that does not get me a new patient. Ultimately, it does. But what does it get me? It gets me a response, whether it's an email response or the patient fills out a form or the patient calls the practice. It gets me a response. Okay? So in theory, and I'll get into this on the next point, in theory, I could get a lot of responses and no new patients if the way we're handling these folks is bad. Let's say you're doing some kind of an implant funnel and you get, 40 patients who are interested, because in a lot of those funnels, what you'll get is an email or a form. You don't necessarily get a phone call. Well, let's say you don't call these folks back. Well, you're not going to get a new patient. It's a bit of a no duh, but you get the idea. It doesn't get you a new patient. I don't get your postcard in the mail and then show up in your practice with a postcard. I call. So the way you monitor whether your marketing is actually working is it getting me phone calls? Is it getting me incoming flow? Now, that incoming flow has to be tracked. And I don't say that it's not nice to be tracked. It's not cool if you track it. You have to track it. This is a non-negotiable point. Now, the problem is you're not going to be the one tracking it. The person answering the phone or getting your emails is going to be the person tracking it. So this is not something that someone can forget to do. Someone doesn't have time to do. Oops, I couldn't do it. Oh, I forgot to ask. This is unacceptable. This has to be tracked every time. I mean, sure, there are tracking phone numbers. You might have a special phone number on your promo or whatever. That's fine, but it still has to be tracked manually at the front. So, we have a new patient call log I'll put on the episode webpage you can download, and also the new patient intake form example you can use as well, which has these questions on there. This is something that you have to drill and bill into your team, because if they don't track these things, you will never know if your marketing is working or what marketing is working. Let's say you're doing 4 or 5 different types of marketing. Okay? Well, if you're not tracking these things, you won't know what to do to improve. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm doing a postcard, I have a pay-per-click campaign, and I have a billboard, and I have some type of a funnel I'm doing. So 4 things, right? Okay. And I'm spending a certain amount of money on each. All right. Well, if I'm looking and I'm keeping on top of this and I see, well, my postcard is really overperforming and my pay-per-click is underperforming. It's not, I'm not getting as much out of it, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about as I go. If I can't tell who is coming from where, right, then I'm not going to know what to do to spend more money on if I want to get more new patients. Let's say that what's actually really getting me a bunch of new patients is my pay-per-click, but if I'm not tracking this, I don't know. So then the answer is just to increase my marketing budget, but I might be increasing my budget for things that really aren't working all that well. So you have to track. This is not an option. I can't stress this enough, because I see this is usually a big point of fall down. And this is, if you track properly, you'll be able to expand a lot faster. Okay, so which leads us sort of to the next point. This is point number 4. You have to understand the entire new patient process in your practice, right? But the entire production process. I'll explain what I mean. So you can know where it breaks down, and you can track the entire line so you can actually figure out the return on investment. And this brings me to the fourth point, which is you have to understand the whole production line as it relates to new patients in your practice. You have to understand this for two reasons, and I'll explain what I mean by the production line in a second. One, if something goes wrong, you know what to fix, and two, you understand how to improve your return on investment. So what do I mean by the production line for a new patient? Well, obviously, we've talked about that promotion is going to get you a response. That's the objective of promotion or marketing, right? It's going to get you a phone call or an email or something along these lines. So now what happens from there? I call your practice. Well, I'm now talking to your receptionist. Your receptionist has to schedule me. So what if your receptionist isn't very good at scheduling? We've talked about this in other episodes, that the average conversion rate in the U.S. for new patient phone calls is 23%. So 23 out of 100 phone calls actually schedule and come into the practice, right? That's terrible. But that's part of the process, and you can see how that's going to affect your marketing's effectiveness. If I get 100 phone calls and only get 23 people, I'm going to make a certain amount, and it's going to, my marketing is going to cost a certain amount with relation to the number of new patients I get. Versus if we're better at handling the phones and we convert 50%, we get 50 new patients. Well, I'm going to make a certain amount more, and that's going to improve my return on investment. But that's all part of the process, right? So it's a phone call. It's conversion, then the person has to actually show up, obviously. And there's a couple things that can mess that up as well, which we'll talk about here in a second. But once they come in, then my sales process comes into play. So let's say I get 100 phone calls and, we convert 60%. That's pretty good, right? Could be better, but that 60% is pretty good. So we get 60 new patients. That's great. But then they come in and my sales process either is not set up properly, or I'm just not very good at it, or the people that are involved are not very good at it. So we don't convert these treatment plans into actual treatment on the schedule. So then where that's going to show up is it'll show up in my return on investment. I'm not making a lot of money then at that point for, the number of new patients that I'm bringing in. And I'll talk about this in the next point, but this could become a bit of a problem. So I have to understand all these various points that relate to not only how do I get a response from my marketing, but how it works inside the practice. Because in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily the marketing that's at fault. It's what's happening in the office. As a matter of fact, I've seen this happen where I remember talking to a marketing company where they had 3 doctors that I knew working with them. One doctor was going gangbusters. They're getting tons of new patients and it's going great. The other doctor thought this marketing company was horrible because it quote unquote wasn't working. Well, then we took a look at how many phone calls. Every office was getting a similar number of phone calls. The difference was in that first office, reception was really good at converting these calls, whereas in the other ones, they weren't, right? So this is something that you have to track, something that you have to watch. Now, if you're keeping a new patient phone log, right, or a new patient call log, rather, then you'll know how many new patient calls you're actually getting, as well as most software will record incoming calls. Especially if you're working with a company that does that, you need to listen to these calls and see what's actually happening. We also do, I've talked about this before, we do a mystery call where we'll grade your receptionist on a scale of 0 to 100 and give you the results and, what could be improved. I'll put a link for it on the episode webpage. But this is something where, literally it's almost like, if I had to pull an analogy, it's like somebody spending hundreds and thousands of dollars on, some type of vitamin supplement and their digestion doesn't work very good. So, they take it in and they don't get any benefit from the vitamin, right? Maybe not the best analogy. It's all that came to mind at this moment, but it's not dissimilar. You're spending all kinds of money to get all these phone calls, but then you're not really taking care of the people when they call in. So you have to understand the entire process and where it potentially can go wrong, or you won't be able to A, fix it, or B, track your ROI. Which brings us to the next point. There's 2 basic metrics we're going to want to track with relation to marketing. Because it's not necessarily the amount of response that I get, right? Like there might be a certain type of a marketing thing that I'm doing that has a very limited list that I can send to, or a very small niche that I'm marketing for, in which case, I might not get a ton of responses from it, but it all works out in the long run from a financial perspective. And then there might be other general types of marketing that I'm doing to my area that I can market to a lot more people. So there's different types of marketing I'm going to do, but I'm going to want to track my return on investment and my acquisition cost with each of these. These, again, like I said, these are 6 things you have to know as a doctor owner. Okay. So you have to know what your ROI is and your acquisition cost is for every type of marketing that you're doing. And, let me rephrase that. You don't have to know this, but if you want to control your marketing, you have to know this. If you want no control or you don't want to know what's going on, then don't track it. Maybe it was a bit too challenging, but you get the idea. So let's talk about each of these. So how do these metrics work? Well, let's start with acquisition cost. So what is acquisition cost? It's basically how much it costs me to get a new patient. So let's start with a kind of simple example. Let's say I spent $10,000 on a bunch of postcards that I sent out and I got 50 new patients. Okay. So $10,000 spent and I get 50 new patients. That's how many new patients actually ended up in the practice. So in that case, I am spending $200 per new patient. So I'm going to want to know this acquisition cost because it's interesting. If I spend $10,000 and I get 50 new patients, and let's say I find out that my problem is reception, right? Well, then they'll start getting me more new patients from the phone calls that are coming in from the postcard, and my acquisition cost will go down because if I can turn that $10,000 I spent into 100 new patients, now that's $100 per new patient. You see how this works? So you have to know your acquisition cost because you're going to compare your acquisition cost for each different type of marketing that you're doing. And not all marketing is created equally. Let's say I'm doing a lot of FMR cases, right? Doing a lot of big cases, all on 4s, all on 6s, things like this. Well, the average all on 4, all on 6 case might be $30, $40, $50, $60,000. Well, if I'm spending, $1,000, $2,000 to get, on average, my acquisition cost, and I'm making $60,000 per case, that's not a bad return on investment. Do you see? So just because one acquisition cost for one type of marketing is higher than another doesn't mean that you would stop that marketing, but this is something that you're going to want to know. Because let's say I'm doing 2 different types of marketing that basically get me the same profile type patient. I'm looking for just a general patient in the area, and I'm offering some type of discounted cleaning and exam, and I'm doing that on, Google pay-per-click, and I'm doing a postcard. And I find out I'm spending $200 for a patient like that, or $200 for a patient like that for my postcard, but I'm spending $300 or $400 on Google pay-per-click. All right. So I'm going to have to make some decisions at that point. Maybe I'm going to have to tighten up my pay-per-click a bit. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, and that can be done wrong a number of different ways where, we're advertising at 4 a.m, or, 6 towns away where nobody's going to drive here or something like this. But that tells me I'm advertising essentially for the same type of patient, just general dental patient, and I'm spending a lot more on one area than I'm spending on the other, in which case I might pull back on one area and do more of the other, or I might have to figure out how to tighten up that area. Do you see? So acquisition costs, that's the first thing. The second thing is return on investment. Now, essentially, how am I going to calculate return on investment? It's very simple. I'm going to look at how much I spent on the marketing and how much did the practice make. But here's where it gets a little funny because you have to relate that to time to a degree. So what do I mean by that? Well, in most cases, I think a pretty safe assumption is a month. Okay. Like I wouldn't look at this necessarily on a week to week basis because theoretically, if I did a marketing campaign, let's say I'm doing, some Google campaign and I get 5 new patients this week off the Google campaign. Well, they come in and let's say they were coming in for initial exams. Well, I've done the initial exam. All right. And maybe I was doing some type of a discounted new patient exam, in cleaning or something like this, but they're not coming back next week to go over their treatment until next week to do their treatment plan, to go over their treatment plan. So if I'm doing it on a week-to-week basis, I'm not going to see that return in there. So a nice sample size, let's say, would be a month. So let's say for the month of January, I spent, $5,500 on a particular type of marketing, right? Whatever it is. It doesn't matter. A billboard, a postcard, a funnel, it doesn't matter, okay? I spent $5,500. And then in January, if you look at all the patients, because again, this is why you have to track it, folks, and it has to go in the computer. Otherwise, it can get manual and a little annoying is, I then run the patients that I got off this marketing campaign this month, and I look at how much did they spend in the practice, right? So again, that can be a bit tricky depending upon how your sales process works, and if there's insurance involved. Because if they spent, let's say it was a $5,000 treatment plan, well, I might not see that $1,000 that their insurance is going to pay until next month. But whatever, it's one of these things. You don't want to drive yourself nuts over this. It eventually balances out, okay? There always is going to be an anomaly, but it eventually balances out. But take it on a month-to-month basis. So I got, I spent $5,500 on this campaign this month, and I pull up all the new patients that came in off of this, and they spent $40,000 in the practice. Okay, so I spent $5,500 on the marketing. They paid $40,000. My average return on investment was about $7.27. I know I could have picked rounder numbers for this, folks, for every dollar that I spent. That's not a bad ROI, right? But let's say I spent $5,500 and I made $5,500. That's 1-to-1. That's terrible. Or worse, I made $4,000. I'm losing money by doing this marketing. I would have been better off not doing it at all. Now, you could say in the long term, the average patient to it, average value of a patient in a dental practice is going to be $1,200 to $1,500, per year or in the first year, right? So it eventually might work out, but you want to track this as far as what did I make off of this particular marketing last month? And you're going to want to look at this over time, because if it starts to sag or it starts to become problematic, then you're going to run into issues. All right. This is where your marketing starts to go wrong and you start to hear complaints about marketing companies. So you have to track this though. Your ROI, that was tough to say. Your ROI is something that you have to track. And let's take a look at each of these. So we have acquisition cost and ROI. What messes up your acquisition cost is if you're not doing a good job at reception. Well, A, if your marketing is getting no response, which is always possible. B, if you're not doing a great job at reception. And one last thing that can actually cause new patients to, become problematic, which I thought I'd just interject in here real quick, is the amount of time it takes to get into the practice. I've seen this happen before where, a doctor goes, I need new patients, lots of new patients. So I'll ask him, okay, if I call your practice on Monday, I just moved to the area and I want to get my teeth cleaned. When can you get me in? Let me look. 3 weeks. That's our first opening. 3 weeks. So let's look at that for a second. And I may have mentioned this before, but unless I'm a referral, my wife goes to your office or my kids go or my best friend or somebody, like I have some degree of loyalty to you. I'm probably not going to wait 3 weeks. I'm probably going to find another office at that point. So if it becomes very difficult to get people in, now if I'm the one pushing it to 3 weeks, I call and you say, we can get you in 11 o'clock on Thursday. And I go, I can't come in Thursday. I can't come in the next week. I'm the one pushing it 3 weeks. That's fine. But if it's one of those deals where you can't fit me in for 3 weeks because there's zero availability, that is going to tank your new patient. So when I have somebody ask me that and they tell me it takes forever to get a new patient in, like you're wasting your money. You need to clear up some space in your schedule. And usually, it's not like somebody wants to make people wait 3 weeks. There's a reason they're making people wait 3 weeks because they're really packed. Well, that's an organizational problem, and you have to figure that out. And that's not an excuse not to market. You need to make that work. You need to block out some new patient time. Maybe there's 1 or 2 blocks a day where you can actually fit people in. Because if you don't have time to fit people in, and again, I'm not some really hooked, loyal referral who wants to come to your practice, I'm going to start calling other offices if you can't fit me in. So this is just something I figured I'd mention. But that and not handling, not getting response, not handling patients adequately at reception or not having availability is going to make your acquisition cost go up. So you're going to spend more to get a new patient. Now, those things plus your sales process are what are going to mess up your ROI. So if I do my advertising and I get, however many phone calls I get and I get 30 new patients. Let's say my conversion rate's good and I get those patients in and they show up and my sales process is messed up. And I've done several episodes on how this can happen, but it might be either I'm just not very good at sales. I just have trouble presenting treatment, or maybe I'm not really involved in the process and I have somebody else do it who's not very good at it, or I don't have time to do it. I pop in to do my quick new patient exam and I tell the patient everything they need in 5 minutes and they really don't understand it. Well, they're not going to buy. So then I'm going to have that situation where I spent a bunch of money to drive people into the business and then I'm not taking care of them when they come in so that they really understand the treatment that they need and want it, and they're not going to pay. So then I'm going to have spent all this money and then nobody pays, so it looks like my return on investment is bad. So you have to make sure that the sales process works because that's a part of what's going to create that return on investment for your marketing. Which goes to our last point. This is point number 6. The things that you have to know is you have to, well, it's not really something you have to know. It's really something you have to do. You have to pay regular attention to these things. This should be built into your management process. If you look in your practice, there are probably certain processes that you have installed. Even if you don't have a lot of management going on or you don't have a huge number of systems, there are probably certain processes that you've established, certain meetings or certain things that you do or certain times that you pay bills or whatever that might be. Well, you want to start setting up a process where you review your marketing. I would review it on a monthly basis at least. You know, it might be more frequent than that if I would do it weekly, ideally. But on a monthly basis, you're looking and keeping an eye on what your marketing is doing. You have to pay attention to these things and look at your ROI, look at your acquisition cost, look at what's working and what's not working, because you might see some opportunities there. Something's really working and you could expand it to get more new patients. Something's really working terrible and you need to do something about that. But you won't know these things unless you pay attention. And one other thing that I've just observed over the years that marketing does is it can get tired. And this may or may not be something that is, you know, real to you that you've seen, but you go get your mail every day, you'll notice you have a bunch of junk mail, right? You may have seen the same junk mail piece coming in now for months and months and months. And maybe the first time you saw it, and it looks exactly the same from the same place. First time you saw it, maybe you looked at it. The second time, you already saw that. Third time, you don't even look. Fourth time, it just goes in the garbage, right? So marketing can get old and marketing can get tired. So this is why you'll sometimes see, you know, you have this particular area of marketing you're doing. It could even be social media, it could be pay-per-click, could be whatever. And then you see you're running these ads and then you see the response start to tail off just the slightest little bit and start to drop. Well, you want to watch that like a hawk, because that might be something that you need to do something about. Maybe you need to freshen it up a bit. I mean, it could be as silly as I've seen clients change the color of their postcard, the font on their postcard, the picture on their postcard, a little bit of verbiage on their pay-per-click ad, the headline of their pay-per-click ad. The offer stays the same. You know, they're offering a discounted cleaning exam, x-rays, etc. So the offer stays the same, but the way the postcard looks is a little bit different, because now that might grab a little bit more attention. I've experienced this, I don't know how many times over the last 20-something years, where I've had the same seminar I'm advertising. I change the headline and the picture, and all of a sudden the response picks up. So you're not going to notice these things unless you're paying regular attention. This isn't something like a machine or a light switch where you just switch it on and you walk away and the light stays on. You have to always make sure the light stays on, okay? So I would build into your marketing, or your management rather, process a regular marketing review. I would look monthly so you can catch things when they just start to tail off before they are, you know, tanking and you have a bit of an emergency on your hands rather. All right, so that covers the basic 6 points. And like I said, these are things you own a business, you're an executive, whether you like it or not, no matter who you have doing anything for you. I mean, you could see this. If you have a hygienist and they're, you know, cleaning your patient's teeth, that does not absolve you of responsibility for your patient's health. And maybe it's not the exact same thing, but if you subcontract a marketing company to take care of your new patients, that does not absolve you of your responsibility as the executive in your business. You're still responsible to make sure you're getting an adequate number of new patients. What I would recommend is we cover a lot of what I covered today, and obviously a ton more at the MGE New Patient Workshop. This actually teaches you what you need to know as a doctor owner to control your new patient flow, no matter what marketing methods you're using. I'll put a link for it on the episode webpage. But that's what I would probably challenge you to do if you want to make sure that you actually keep this area under control. Do these 6 things, learn about this area so that you can stay on top of it. Otherwise, like I said, you're going to end up in a situation where you're doing things that you don't necessarily want to do, join plans or stay in plans, because you can't figure your way out of it. I hope this helped. And if you have any questions, about MGE, you can visit us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. If you want to email me personally, there's a little contact Jeff button on the website, Dental Business RX. You can click that, or you can email me directly at jeffb@mgeonline.com. Folks, I wish you a great year. Let's have a great year here in 2023, and I'll see you at the next episode.